Welcome to Redefining Conscious Community in the Metamodern Era. I had to think of something, right? Right. And in our tradition, of course, you don't need to do this, but we like to dedicate all good things that happen here to benefit all beings. We like to start and end with that, to remind us that that's what we're here for. That's what we're here on the planet. That's what we always want to keep in mind, and that tends to make for a good life, a happy life, which is one of the reasons we do it. And another reason is, why not? What better thing is there to do than benefit all beings? I have not been able to find anything better yet. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming. We're at Clear Sky Retreat Center in southeastern British Columbia, Canada. And we're on the traditional lands of the indigenous Ktunaxa people. It's been reinterpreted as Kootenai or Kootenai. There's a Kootenai National Forest in Montana, for example. I often wonder what happened to people's pronunciation back in the day that you get from Ktunaxa to Kootenai. Anyway, it must not have been paying attention. Must not have been meditators. So here at Clear Sky, we just had our 20th anniversary, which was a really big milestone for us. Yeah, a big celebration we had for that. And so I'd like to start by telling you a bit about our center, telling you a bit about our experiments with conscious community, this residential community here. And I'm also going to pause halfway through because I know it's challenging. I know people are busy, and I know it's a big commitment to be here for an hour. So halfway through, we'll pause. And if you'd like to leave at that time, you're so welcome to do that. And when I give you that opportunity. So Clear Sky, we were a group of expats living in Japan, of all places. So a number of us were living and working in Japan for years at a time. And our meditation teacher was invited there. He's Canadian born. His name is Doug Duncan. He was using a Zen name, Qapel, before he just passed away in October. He was invited to teach in Japan, and a community formed around him. And the funniest thing was, we could not find places to do meditation retreats in Japan. It was the darndest thing. It's like temples everywhere and no place to meditate. So we ended up looking for property in the US and Canada because he was Canadian. Numerous people were Canadian, numerous people were American. The greatest numbers of people were Canadian and American. So that's where we looked for property, and we found this beautiful place and purchased it. And our whole intention was just to meditate. We just wanted to do long retreats, a month at a time, 3 months at a time, 6 months a year. This was our dream. And we were really focused on our meditation practice. We were keen meditators. We were keen students of Buddhist philosophy. And we were really focused on waking up, really focused on enlightenment. And I mean that technically in the Buddhist sense, Satapana, Sakadagami, Anagami, Arhat, and the bodhisattva path. So there's a very specific definition that we mean. Not a lot of people are using the word enlightenment and awakening, and we mean it, I think, a little bit differently, like the Buddha. Right? And our tradition, however, is a little bit unusual. Our founder, my teacher, Qapel's teacher, Namgyal Rinpoche, was actually Canadian born. And as far as we know, I'm not sure, haven't really researched it, but he may have been the first white person to be recognized as a Tibetan Rinpoche. And interestingly, he awakened. He was Canadian born. He moved to London. He awakened in the Western mysteries. So Kabbalah, Tarot, Rosicrucian Masonic tradition. That's how he awakened. And then in London in the 1950s, he met Utilawanta Sayadaw, a Myanmarese meditation master. That's the Theravadan Orthodox system, who invited him to Yangon and he went to Yangon, learned to meditate, became a monk, a Theravadan monk, and then a Bodhi. Moved back to London, started a Vihara, met Aldous Huxley, and yeah, interesting times, you know, very early Buddhist in the 50s and 60s. And founded Johnston House, which became Samye Ling. And if you don't know what these places are, it doesn't really matter, but if you do, it might be interesting. Moved back to Canada, founded the Dharma Center of Canada, and traveled with his students around the world. Really figured that people benefit from seeing the world how it is and learning directly for ourselves, expanding our minds, getting out of our comfort zones, and so on. So he traveled a lot. And on one of his trips to India, he was invited to Sikkim and Rumtek, which is the traditional seat of the Karmapas, and had an audience with the 16th Karmapa, that's the previous one, and when there was just one, and was spontaneously recognized as Namgyal Rinpoche. And so our tradition combines the Western mysteries and Theravadan Orthodox Buddhism, as well as Vajrayana, to Himalayan style Buddhism. And well, if you're that flexible, you may as well just keep being flexible, right? So we really use anything that works to help us unfold as spiritual beings. And in particular on this bodhisattva path, which is about unfolding spiritually so that we may get better at benefiting all beings. And I find that a really exciting way to orient, like, how can we better benefit all beings? Like, what can we do? How can we show up? That's a really, for me, a really creative endeavor. So back to our founding our meditation center. And metamodernity, for example. And we're big fans of integral as well, and ecology, and so on. More about that later. So I'm gonna share about us for a bit more, another 20 minutes or so, and then I'd like to have a little exercise, and then I'd like to open it up for questions and comments for you guys, because I'd really like to hear what's up for you, what's important for you, and how we might be interested in connecting too. So please make really good use of the chat if you want to share in there what you're involved with, or how you'd like to be in touch, and so on. We'll save that and use that. Okay, so we founded our center and wanted to meditate, and all of a sudden realized that we had to run a center. That really took us by surprise, and we needed all these skills that we didn't have. You know, we were so proud of ourselves for being such great meditators, and then it was like, business plan? What? Who knows how to write a business plan? Nobody knew how to write a business plan, right? And then we realized, so of course we had arguments about our business plan. Then we realized we needed communication skills, which we also didn't have, because you don't need them when you're alone on your cushion, right? So all of a sudden we needed organizational development skills, and we needed interpersonal skills. We needed to learn how to relate to one another, because we couldn't just, we figured out pretty quick, fortunately, that we couldn't just escape to our cushions and close out the world. And this was a really humbling experience for us, because we really thought that we could just meditate our way through everything, and that was like the best, that was superior. And to acknowledge that, like, actually, you know, business skills are helpful, and emotional intelligence and social intelligence are essential. This felt really humbling at the time. And what we learned was that it was really interesting. Like, speaking for myself personally, I did not know that I didn't have interpersonal skills. Like, I was just kind of a normal person, I think. And, you know, I didn't really know how to communicate with my friends and beloved Sangha members, and they were driving me crazy. And you know, I had enough resources to realize that that was my problem. And I didn't know I had those problems. And here's, you know, human beings, civilization around for 10,000 years. And so, you know, how did this happen that after 10,000 years of human civilization, a group of beings dedicated to benefiting all beings don't have interpersonal skills or communicational skills and can't get along. So that's what I mean by it was very humbling, but in a really good way, right? And so we got to work developing those skills. And remember how I said that we use anything and everything that works. And so that's been really essential for our unfoldment and has given us a lot of really great resources for the metacrisis, right? Oh, okay, well, let's start with developing some interpersonal skills and some communication skills if we want to help one another through these challenging times. And that's served us really well. Our residents here at Clear Sky, we're usually about a dozen residents full-time, and then we have part-time retreats with a capacity of about, well, we just had our biggest one, which is almost 50 people. That was the most we've ever had. And our residents run our center as part of our spiritual practice, and that's called the path of karma yoga. So you've heard of hatha yoga. Maybe you've heard of bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, jnana yoga, path of scholarship, and karma yoga is the spiritual path of service. And that's what we do here. And so we don't have salaries. And that was another big challenge. Like, how do you motivate people to do things if you can't bribe them with a bonus, with a Christmas bonus? Right. And we were just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So we had to figure all these things out, how to keep one another motivated and inspired. And our spiritual teacher, Qapel, when he was around, everything magically worked. And then if he, went for a drive or something, then things would fall apart. And so we had to learn about this, not being over reliant on our guru and not kind of, just saying yes to him all the time and not being able to ask questions and so on. That's a kind of false, things worked when he was around, but it was a little bit false if it all fell apart when he wasn't there. So we negotiated that too. And it was really great for strengthening our community, which in Buddhism we call Sangha. So all of this, these were kind of painful realizations our center really helped us see all of our faults, and it seemed like they were endless, but it was ultimately very rewarding and has really helped us be much more compassionate people, because we know how challenging it is to be in community, to run a center, to live the bodhisattva path. And anything that makes us more compassionate and wiser, those are our highest values. So we're really grateful for those experiences. And of course, we got set up this way because we all grew up in a consumerist capitalist culture, which doesn't really teach you anything about emotional intelligence, social intelligence, getting along, and so on, and doesn't teach you about that and doesn't tell you that they're not teaching you about that. So it's no small wonder we didn't have those skills. And it was really interesting that we chose to not live in the consumerist capitalist model. That's why we chose to live at a retreat center, but we still weren't fully aware of the pros and cons of how we were raised and what we were choosing. So that's been a really awesome journey. So we learned that we had to be business people in order to run a center. We're a nonprofit with charitable status, but it is still a business or an organization anyway. And we didn't want to be business people. Wow, boy, did we have a lot of resistance to that. I'm not a business person. I'm a spiritual practitioner, right? Real kind of superiority complex about that. And so we wanted somebody else to be the business person or business people, and we wanted them to deal with all the organizational stuff. And we're kind of looking in our Sangha, who's got some of these business skills, who's got money skills, like you do it. And so what's so interesting about that is we were like, there's power and money involved here. Who can we pass this to? Because I don't want to deal with the power of being able to work in the material world, like as a business person, and I don't want to deal with the money. So let me hand over power and money to somebody else. and then look down on them because I'm a spiritual practitioner, right? And then kind of resent them for having money and power, right? So this was kind of what we tried to do. It didn't work. Yay. We, we had the wherewithal to be like, maybe we should figure this out, how to do this ourselves. Maybe everybody should have some capacity for doing this. And so we've done a lot of work on shadow integration. And our shorthand for this, well, we call it the first three chakras. Survival is the first, root chakra, second chakra is relationship, third chakra is power. I mean, this is really shorthand, right? And our other shorthand for that is money, sex, and power. So those first three chakras, that's the platform for our hearts, my friends, for our communication, our self-expression, for our intuition and our ability to connect with the cosmos. And if those first three aren't solid, the whole thing is going to topple. So we have done and continue to do a lot of work on shadow integration and having those first three chakras be really healthy and well integrated. And Karen, who's on this call, another thing that's exciting is then people have developed careers out of this. So Karen specializes in money and spirituality, right? Because as you probably know, a lot of spiritual practitioners are in a similar position to what I'm describing, where we renounce the world. And so maybe we haven't developed healthy relationships with money, for example, or sex or power. And a member of our community is a somatic sex therapist, and she specializes in, for example, the wheel of giving and receiving, also known as the wheel of consent. So we really help people to be empowered with our own choices and our own ability to be resourced. And that's been really great. So I said we usually have about a dozen residents in our community, and we're a hybrid model. We live our spiritual path together every day. We meditate together every day. We eat together every day. And we also have jobs. And we manage to do these things together. And part of it is one of the challenges that we had in the beginning was that people felt like their professional life and their relationships and their spiritual life were all competing with one another. So we've put a lot of effort into having these be a whole life so that we don't have to of course, there's always a negotiation between these things, but people feel empowered to have relationships, feel empowered to develop their careers, and are well equipped to go and have a life outside of our center if that's what we choose to do. And we feel really great about that coming to our center and living and working here. We have a 3-month karma yoga program, for example, and sometimes people come here, temporarily for 3 months or 6 months or a year or a month outside of retreats to live and work here and have this experience of being in community. And we use that time to help people to develop skills so that they can go back in the world with more skills to greet it. So having a full-time residential community allows us to experiment in different kinds of ways, and which is a bit different from part-time communities or virtual communities, which we also have. We also have part-time communities. People come here for a retreat, and people come here to live for a period of time and then go home. And we also have a virtual community, and because we were expats from Japan, we were a pretty techie group, and we were staying in touch with our community members who were still in Japan. So we've had a virtual community since 2012, and are exploring virtual communities further because not everyone is going to be in residence. But in residential community, we get to know one another really well. And we're with one another in all different kinds of situations. And naturally, some patterns emerge over time, right? So a really easy one to recognize, and I had this one, I first recognized it in myself, is I wanted to live in community. That's why I was here. That's why I supported the center and so on. And I really wanted to go back to my own room and close the door and be by myself and keep everybody else out. And it's a big adjustment to start living in community after you've had your own apartment or your own house or condo or something. And it's a really interesting experience to want to be in community and want to escape community at the same time. And it's kind of a painful experience to hold those two simultaneously, but it is common, right? And, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there to unpack. It's about feeling safe. It's about feeling accepted. It's about feeling loved. And of course, it comes down to self-love, right? If we feel self-love, if we feel comfortable in our own skin, then we can be comfortable in any kind of situation, anywhere. And so that's part of the work that we do here, and part of the, you know, quality that, interestingly, humanity seems to be losing, right? Or has lost, right? I think if you go to countries that are quote unquote less developed, they're really more developed in terms of people being comfortable in their own skin, right? Just being comfortable with who they are, with having some self-acceptance. So we recognize that this kind of adjustment of wanting to be in community and wanting to escape community at the same time, wanting to go to our own room, we saw it again and again, and thought of it as a stage, and then we'd kind of work on that, and then the desire to be together with other people would grow, and we considered that the next stage, right? A sort of better stage, a kind of unfoldment, or a kind of evolution of embracing community. It felt better, definitely an improvement. And then we saw other patterns, other stages. For example, accountability about the work that we were undertaking, like comfort with being accountable for oneself, following through on things, having good communication, and so on. And we could perceive stages in this too, right? And like, oh, we've seen this before, we know how to work with this. And of course, the more we saw it, the better we got at helping people move through it and improve, which felt better for everybody. And so we could see these stages. So when we came across developmental theory, and we first encountered it in integral theory and integral spirituality, we were like, oh, right, the stages, right? Developing the stages, getting higher in the stages. We knew exactly what it was. And it was really exciting for us to, you know, we thought we were perceiving it on our own. And so it was really great to meet a framework that had already developed it so extensively. And so now we're really embracing that, exploring that together, helping one another work through the different stages and different lines of development and showing up. So shadow integration is, as you know, is not easy work. It's messy by definition. And we have to recognize some really challenging truths about ourselves to do shadow integration, and let go of some things that are pretty central to our identity, or our illusion of thinking they'll make us safe, feel safe. We have to let go of some things in order to become the human beings that we'd like to be, you know, in order to become kinder people, more compassionate people, wiser, more able to meet the challenges of our times, and dedicate our life energy to the welfare of all beings, to the planet. And the result is a lot of relief, really. As challenging and as scary as it seems to let go of these things, it just feels so much better. A lot of relief and a lot of joy, right? Then our natural state of joy is available to us. And this is about growing up. So you probably recognize these terms: waking up, growing up, showing up, perhaps from integral theory and Ken Wilber's work. And we've been really happy to draw on that. And I have to give a shout out for the very important stage of fucking up, because there is plenty of that as well. And so we just get okay with that. Like, yeah, of course we're going to fuck up, and we all fuck up, and it's okay, right? We learn from that. So we've been involved for a long time. Okay, we're 20 years old. We've been doing ecological restoration, for example, for about 15 years. We're involved with other kinds of social impact, very interested in social entrepreneurship. We draw on the power of community to address the metacrisis and to create an alternative, right? If you don't want to live in the consumerist capitalist model, what do you do, right? So our answer to that question, I think there's lots of different answers, but our answer has been, well, let's create a community, a place where people can go, where we can try to experiment with alternatives to capitalism and consumerism. And we're small, and I wouldn't ever claim to, have huge answers. And I think a lot of you people here have your own great answers, which I'm excited to learn more about, which is why we're here at Limicon. But this ability to co-create the world that we want to live in is what really intrigues and excites me. And we're so much better resourced to do that together in groups of people than we are as individuals. And so this is why I really love conscious community, and I'm so excited about it. And speaking of addressing the metacrisis, learning to get along and to communicate with one another and work together, without bribes of bonuses and salary increases, that's a pretty great skill set to have in the 2020s. So part of the motivation for Clear Sky, our center, it's clearskycenter.org. Could you drop that? Oh, you just did. Huh. And then our virtual teachings, our virtual community is planetdharma.com. And we use this, we really want to demonstrate why spiritual awakening is valuable, why it matters in the 2020s. I think somebody asked me that, like, why would anybody want to awaken? I was so surprised by the question. I was like, what? I didn't have a good answer. And then I realized, I was like, right, we can live that answer. We can just be demonstrating the answer to that all the time. And I just love doing that. That really juices me. And doing that in community, or in Buddhist philosophy, they call it Sangha, community of awakened beings and awakening beings, is, I find super rewarding. So I want to do a little exercise here. It's fast. It's something that we have done together. It's drawing on integral theory, or AQual. And you can draw on the whiteboard, is that right? Okay, I'm new to this function. Okay, so Ava, who is our awesome DJ, is gonna put 4 quadrants on the whiteboard. And if you're familiar with this, what the 4 quadrants are. And if you're not, it's pretty simple. It's not a big deal. But so the upper left quadrant is the I quadrant, where we orient mostly from our inner space. So as meditators, we're really heavy in the I quadrant, because we spend a lot of time exploring our minds and what's going on inside, and tend to be introverts. And so the upper left, so we did this exercise on site where and this is what I'm going to ask you to do, is rank your top 2 quadrants where you spend the most time. Okay, and I'll run through what each one is. So upper left is I, and we had a dozen people here on site, in like 10 people's number 1 was the I, right? Because we're meditators, it makes sense. We weren't surprised by that. And then the upper right quadrant is the it quadrant. So if you love to if you love objects, if you love things, if you love doing things. So we have a bird watcher here who spends a lot of time in the it quadrant, so looking at birds, right? And because we're on 310 acres here, we do a lot of work with contractors. For example, we were trying to get a fence. We had a fence that was about to fall over and a pregnant horse. And, we wanted to get the fence done as quickly as possible. We just couldn't. The fence guy never called us back. And we're like, what's with this guy? What's with it? Well, he's a fence guy. He's on about the fence. So just one day he showed up and did the whole fence, without telling us. Right. And we were like, what? So he's in the it quadrant. All that matters is the fence and getting the fence done. And he did an amazing job. It was so great, which I couldn't do because the it quadrant isn't my best. Okay, so then lower left is the we quadrant. What's our experience together, right? So here I was like, why isn't the fence guy calling me? Because I'm kind of in the we quadrant a fair bit of the time, especially developing community. We're in the we quadrant a fair bit of the time. That's lower left. And then lower right is the it's quadrant. That's about systems. So the systems people, it's really fun. Okay, now that the community is all having a good time together, let's turn it into a system so we can replicate it over time and give people the instructions when they arrive. So that's the systems quadrant. And if you've ever given the same directions to 10 people again and again and again, you become a real fan of the systems quadrant. Okay, so can we put on there, are people able to put on their number 1 and 2? And can we jot it real quickly for us too?
Yeah, so we can start. So it's now open. I'll draw the quadrants.
Okay, and could you just write I and it and it's and we?
Yes. Apologies. That's I. I am not right-handed. It's. And then you can add your top 2. There.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks. Oh, I think I'm I and it's are my top 2. I meditate, I have this great stroke of inspiration, and then I go create a system.
And your I is number 1, correct?
Yeah, thank you. Sensei means teacher. Oh yeah, look at all these. Yeah, a lot of it's people. Yeah, a lot of system thinkers, huh?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
Come on down.
Wow, look at you guys go. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so I wanted to share this exercise with you. I think it was Duncan or Karen's idea to do this exercise on site. We did this exercise on site, and it was like all of our communication issues became very visible. Right? We just realized it's like, okay, we shouldn't have the it person in charge of welcoming people onto the property, right? Because it's just not their language. Right. And the we people, are trying to make sure everybody's feeling okay. And the it's people are trying to turn it into a system. Right. And there's some tension there, but there's some genius there too, if you know that that's what's happening. And so we felt like we had it all in a very visible way, and could see oh, that's why there's that tension. And then we could help it work for us rather than sort of hey, we're talking about how everybody's feeling, not about how we codify it and replicate it. Okay, and then we can, right? If that's what we decide to do together. or we can just take it back and say like, hang on, we're not ready to go there. We need to focus on how everybody's feeling together. Okay, wow, look at all that. Yeah, see, the it people get a little bit lonely, don't they? Yeah, we found that on site too. It was our least populated quadrant, and the it people, it was very interesting because none of them were in the we quadrant very much, and so they wouldn't really talk about their feelings very much. They wouldn't really relate very much, and when they did, they would talk about it being kind of lonely, right? And so this really gave us a lot of insights into that, because at the time we were like, well, you're lonely because you never tell us how you're feeling, right? And there's some truth to that too, but we could understand it much better when we looked at it in the context of these quadrants. And of course, the it people are also, needless to say, really important members of the community. They really can get stuff done, for example, besides their intrinsic value. Okay, well, we're past the half mark. I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to go if you needed to sign off. Thanks for coming. And if you want to stay, if you're able to stay, I'd love to field some questions, or if you have any questions about conscious community, experiments in community, running a center, developing a center, virtual community, anything, the floor is yours. Yes, Mariah.
It's actually Jim, who is busy making the salad as a one in the
Yeah. Thanks, Sensei. This was a really wonderful talk. I had two questions, both out of my own curiosity, but also because I think it'd be interesting to the group. The first one is, can you just talk about how, as a small group of people without a lot of billionaires supporting you, how you were able to finance the buildings and the land together in a non-capitalistic model? I think that would be really valuable for people to hear, and I'm curious about it, learning a little more myself. And the second is, if you
Can I do the first one first and then we'll come back? Okay, thanks. I just don't want to forget. So thanks for raising that. That's so important. And I think we're in a real historical shift. Karen has done a lot of work with other spiritual centers, and what we've learned is historically, you know, times have changed in the 60s and 70s and earlier. Land was cheap and abundant, and somebody would have land and be like, yeah, sure, I'll give it to everybody, I'll give it to the center. And philanthropy, single major donors were also an important model, that a lot of centers revolved around one or two very flush people who were very generous and made things possible. One or two are a small group. And that seems to be changing. It's an interesting, the rise of social ventures and social entrepreneurship, social enterprises is happening at the same time of these single donors bearing the kind of financial responsibility for centers is on the decline. And I think people found that they were giving a lot of money and they weren't really feeling entirely great about how it was being used, or the oversight, or things like that, which is fair enough. And so we did have some very generous donors in our first few years, which was great. And they, you know, tremendous gratitude to them. And it really kept us enfeebled. It kept the rest of us financially enfeebled because we just relied on them and counted on them. And one had the kindness to say like, okay, I can continue these monthly donations for another year. And that's a pretty good lead time. But even so, we were like, we didn't know what we were going to do after a year was up. And that's when our business skills and our financial maturity development really began in earnest. And so now it's much more sustainable, where pretty much every resident here has a good, a healthy financial acumen, healthy basic financial skills, ability to have a budget, and so on. So it's much more widely distributed and so much more solid that way. We are a very lean organization, and we've just turned a corner from being sustainable, which took us a long time to achieve financial sustainability and was really touch and go for a while. I want to normalize that. Like, if you're touch and go financially, don't feel bad. That's normal. It's not easy. We became financially sustainable, and now we've really got our eyes on being financially generative. And so far so good. We'll see how it goes. We're cautiously optimistic about that. But yeah, I also feel really good about not having you know, the financial responsibility be a weight on a small number of people.
The one follow-up question there in a little more detail is your model for financing your buildings, like how people contribute to Clear Sky, their own personal finances, and how that looks and how that kind of interacts, because it's not kind of a usual approach is my understanding, but I don't really have the detail there.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure. So our residents are really important for our, let's see, residents pay rent here and pay for food. And that's an important income stream for us. And it's a really good deal. It's a beautiful place. It's a comfortable place. And we have really good food. And it's a really good value. But it is not everybody, and everybody contributes hours of effort to supporting the center. So if you're a hardline capitalist, you would think you're being ripped off, because the center doesn't pay you. We pay the center, but we do that because we believe in it, and for the joy of it, and because that's our path. Is that your question, Jim? Am I answering it? Or go ahead and tell me the thing that you're wanting me to talk about.
I know that people contributed their own money to building like the residential buildings, and just how does that work, right? So like,
okay,
who owns the building, and like, how, you know, what is the model there? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so the whole center is owned by a foundation. We don't have an owner per se, and that's been a huge relief as one of the founders. I'm so glad I don't own this center. It would be really hard to, yeah, it's a great freedom to not own property. And I think you're referring to, we have one building, we were short on accommodation, and it just so happened it was some young people around 30 years old, really bright, really talented, you know, wanted their own space, didn't want to have to move when we had retreats and stuff. And we wanted to provide that for them, but didn't really have the bandwidth to kind of figure out how to do it. So one day I just said, hey, you smart and talented young people, figure out how you're gonna make your own accommodation. And so I think what you're talking about is basically they invested in this new building by paying a whole bunch of rent up front. And that's one of the ways that we financed it, is by people having that investment and developing an agreement so that if they leave before that rent period is up, they would get that rent for accommodation not used, they would get that money back. Is that what you're talking about? Is that what you're?
Yep, that's great. That's exactly what I was curious about. And then the second question.
So thanks, Jim. So they just made that up, right? So we can be totally creative with how we finance things, right? There wasn't a model. They didn't learn that somewhere. They were just like, hey, we could do this, which is really brilliant of them. And yeah, we've got a lot more financial freedom than we're led to believe. Financial creativity.
My second question, and thank you for your detailed answers, is just wanting to hear, you know, I know Clear Sky is looking to build a temple, and just talking about the symbol and the value of a temple in the metacrisis, and kind of how that really is important for your mission.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jim. And Drag, I see your hand too. We'll go to you next. Yeah, so we've had this vision of building a meditation hall or a temple, a meditation space, teaching hall space for a long time, and remain committed to that vision and are undertaking that in earnest. And we really see ourselves, well, we have this Western mysteries tradition. We really see ourselves as lights in the darkness, as I'm sure all of you on this call see yourself, right? We're a light in the darkness. We're an oasis in the desert, and we're here to be a resource for people. Like come here and find relief, or come here and learn about some of the things that have worked for us and take it back to your center or your project, your community. Absolutely. And the room that I'm in, you can't really see it. It's just a room. When we bought this place, it had a 5-bedroom house designed to be a B&B, and that has been our main building. And our teaching space is a room in that building. It's a fairly small room, and it's served us well, but it's yeah, we want to have an inspirational space that is holding the energy of everyone's aspirations, that comes here to do spiritual work, to benefit all beings, to awaken with that purpose, with that bodhisattva path, that so that the building space, the architecture, the design conveys that message. And so that's part of the aspiration. I'm not sure, Jim, if I feel like you're asking me these really great leading questions and I'm missing the lead. So I hope I responded. Okay, great. So Dragpa.
Wow, I have just a million things of praise to offer you, Sensei, and the Sangha, Clear Sky Sangha. And I mean, really, like my head hurts. I've been like nodding in agreement during this 30 minutes. So yeah, I live at a Tibetan Buddhist Center, 500 acres, 33-year anniversary, nonprofit 501c3, New York, volunteer-based, long-term residency programs, how to balance money, how to be in community but escape community. I mean, you're just like pinging off amazing things. And the fact that you pulled this off for 20 years with good food, with residents, with all qual, 4-quadrant, Metamodern friendly, like it's a feat. So big, genuine props. That's like, it's also trailblazing because you're holding lineage. Like obviously there's a lot of lineage honoring with bodhicitta and bodhisattva path, and metacrisis and metamodern and liminal and all these squishy, emergent, evolving sticky parts. So that's a big thank you, a genuine heart, like
thanks to you.
Really folded hands, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you too.
And I'd love to learn more. I opened your website and I'll peek around and there's just tons of stuff, and
yeah,
I'd love
let's be in touch
from you all. Yeah.
Likewise.
Cool, thank you. The question I had, which is a really tender, wild question, and it's around all the shadow stuff, which you said you all have done some work with that. And there's so many different kind of prototype experiments with how to have a live-in community also integrate shadow work of whatever kind, because you have this actual community and then you start sharing things very vulnerably, but is the container being held and is it broken, and how do you, and new people come in. And so how have you all found to have that shadow work component be a part of the Sangha dynamic instead of something that's encouraged but kind of kept separately upon people's personal discretion? Like, how have you been navigating that?
Did you say celibate?
Oh, shadow work, just any these.
Okay, I thought I heard the word celibate, and just to clarify, we're not a celibate tradition. People may be celibate, and we encourage periods of celibacy, because if you want to be a healthy sexual being, celibacy, a period of celibacy is probably the best starting point. You know, you kind of hit reset, and then you go, whoa, like you kind of take a step back from the sexual game, and you see all the stuff that's been going on, right? Which we can't see when we're in the sexual game, because it just gets real busy.
I didn't mention the celibacy thing, but I was a monk for 3.5 years. So yeah, that foundational work. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the shadow work part, but yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit challenging. We do so much shadow work that it's hard for me to, it's really integrated into our whole culture, and it's hard for me to kind of parse out like what exactly we do that's related to shadow work, because it's a high trust environment, and a number of us have been together for a long time, so we're quite comfortable addressing shadow issues throughout the day. And so people who come here, I think, can be a bit surprised and a bit, you know, it's a tender, sensitive process to kind of move into that way of being where all of our underwear is showing all the time. But it's also, again, a great relief. It's like, oh, right, you know, I don't have anything to hide because everybody knows everything. And if I tried to keep it secret, it'd be a ton of work and everybody would find out anyway. And, you know, that's definitely one of the challenges of living in community, is we're so used to keeping secrets as just kind of a normal thing, you know, where people don't know stuff about us. And then you get in community and you're like, wow, everybody sees everything that's happening. And it's like, yeah, it's a big relief. You don't have to, nothing to hide. We don't mind. Yeah, you know, we're like that too. We've all been through it. So that's kind of a very general answer to your question. We do more specific work. We do retreats that are designed to draw out, you know, creative visualization, kind of theater, enactment, creativity, like creating masks and using costumes and so on. I'm thinking of one retreat we did in particular called The Hero's Journey, where it was really about calling out the shadow, calling out the hero, and then integrating them. So that's one example of when we do it real deliberately. And then we name, we also have a line of study called Astrodharma, where we use people's astrological charts. And one of the great things about that is we can see the patterns in the natal chart. And so it's a pattern, right, where, for example, like somebody talks too much or talks all the time. And then we look at their, and that's awkward to navigate that space with somebody. But then if we look at their chart and we see that they've got a lot of energy in the parts of the chart that are about communication, then we talk about that. We talk about like, oh, it's all that Gemini showing up. So it's not you talk too much. It's like, right, you've got all that Gemini. And then when we need someone who talks, we're like, hey, Gemini person, bring out that great talent of yours, you know, and we can start to making it more objective by having a map, which is what I think metamodernism is so good at. Then it can go from being our problem to being a skill set that can become problematic at times, and we just need to learn to massage it so that we're more focused on cultivating the skills and more aware of when it can be overdeveloped or underdeveloped. Does that help?
That's very, very helpful. Could I ask a quick relevant, kind of distant question about the relationships of people there? And like, it's a 20-year thing. Are there like long-term committed relationships? Do people have kids? Like, is there like Sangha held things with new people kind of curiously engaging? Because you're talking about like a very close-knit, basically family style community in it to win it for a long run.
Yeah.
And that gets very interesting quickly.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah, you're right about that. Some people are in long-term committed relationships. I think we're very open to, we don't have any children here at present. And let's see, we have actually never had any residential children. We have never had any residential families with children. And I think part of that is capacity. I do see that sometime in our future, how that will show up. I'm not sure. And personally, I just don't believe that relationships are binary. I don't believe, I think for some people to be single or to be in a monogamous relationship makes a lot of sense, especially at particular points in people's lives. But that's a binary system. And how can 8 billion people all fit into these two options? That just makes no sense to me. And so we try to be open-minded. We try to support people to have healthy relationships and try to explore, what does that actually even mean, healthy relationships? And that's a big frontier and a fairly challenging one, but I think a good place to explore.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matt, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were getting close to the end or if we're going for another 30 minutes, so I'm happy to retract it. But
thanks for raising that point. Yeah, if you need to go, please do so without any guilt whatsoever. Thanks so much for coming. And I can stay here for your question if you'd like to stay.
I'm curious, I mean, you kind of already spoke to it accidentally right there, it just kind of stumbled into a perfect example of my question, which was, I'm a bit of like an esoteric nerd. And so hearing that some of your background, came from a really, really interesting time in the evolution of spirituality and the inclusion and kind of like illumination of some of the Western mysteries into a more public kind of consciousness. I was curious if you felt like there was something else you felt called to say about how much that still kind of exists within the practice as you all hold it.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. For me, this is really important. Like, we are very strongly rooted in Buddhism, and that is just such an incredible tradition, or traditions, because there's lots of different kinds of Buddhism, but such a gift to the world, that those teachings have become so widely available. And I guess I'll attribute it to Europe, or what, Western. If we're in the West, like, who decides that? Like, from where? But you need to have words to call these things. We've had these awakening traditions for we don't know how long, certainly many centuries, right? And there's tremendous value in that too. And as people raised in that culture, we've got really ready access to that, whereas Buddhism is a little more challenging. I remember in the beginning just kind of my head spinning from trying to memorize all of this new information and new beings and new archetypes, and it's been fantastic. But if you start saying to me kind of like, Venus and Mars, emperor, magician, high priestess, it's effortless. I know what all that is, and I can move into that. And so that's an incredible resource for us to draw on too. And also it's a much more active tradition, right? So Buddhism does tend to be more on the introverted, thank God, right? To help us busy people learn to get present. But there's wonder in that active meditation. And also the Western mysteries are much more group oriented, right? So we just, our lay teachers last retreat, we did the movement of the mandala with the 21 major arcana of the tarot. So massive, active, creative meditation in group. It was incredible. And so yeah, I really honor the power of the heritage of our birth in this part of the world. And to be able to draw on both is such a gift of these times. Thanks for that question.
Thanks so much for speaking to it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Morgan has a question, and I'm not sure if I missed this.
Morgan, please.
Just about the about if a developmental theory that you referenced earlier in the session, and it wasn't integral. Was there another developmental theory that you mentioned?
When I talk about developmental theory, the ones I'm most familiar with, I have learned about through integral, and I'm aware that they exist in other contexts, but that's a bit of a frontier for me. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited to be here at Limicon and becoming more familiar with the Metamodern community is to learn more about that. Is there something more specific you'd like to address, Morgan?
Oh, no, that was just my question. I had put it in the chat. Thank you very much. And thank you to Dragpa for putting in a good website for reference.
Yeah. And Dragpa, back to you. Again, if you need to go, please don't be shy.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. I'm just like seizing the opportunity. So sorry.
Yeah, no, not at all. Let's continue the conversation off after this.
Cool. I'd love to.
Excuse me.
Inter-Sangha dynamics. So Metamodern and 21st century metacrisis anyway, like everyone kind of agrees it's going to have to be a multidisciplinary, intercooperative, get all the specialists and non-specialists together in a cohesive, coordinated way to like just to diagnose the issues, the challenges, let alone to like build community in response to them. So cooperation is like kind of a bedrock essential. If we're going to really navigate this well, it's going to have to require it. So how have you all done that with inter-sangha things like Buddhist and non-Buddhist sanghas or different traditions, or kind of what are some of the different pathways you all kind of delineated around that?
Yeah, great question. Well, we're blessed to have started as expats in Japan, and we were a fairly diverse community there. And some of us were there for shorter periods of time, some of us for longer periods of time. But so some of us are multicultural, and we have people from the US, from Canada, from New Zealand, from England, from Ireland here, and then people who've lived on several continents and multiple countries and speak multiple languages. I'm just trying to give you a sense for the facility people have for being immersed in other cultures. And so we bring all of that, and we do try to really actively explore that. For example, there's very clear differences between people who are from countries that belong to the Commonwealth. There's some patterns across the Commonwealth that show up, and then people who are not from the Commonwealth show up in different ways. And that's been really important for us to navigate, because in short, for people in the Commonwealth, Americans are just incredibly abrupt and rude, right? And then Americans are like, well, you guys never say what is actually happening. You just kind of say something nice. And so we've really needed to negotiate that for the sanity, and the health of our personal relationships, and also to work on a organization together. And then again, that's a good example of like, okay, we need someone who's really diplomatic, who's a Commonwealther who can navigate this space for us. And like, okay, we need somebody to be direct, some American get in here. And as an example. And then Karen's brought really great work with colonized people. She's from Ireland, and yeah, I'm trying to think of a few examples, and nothing's coming off the top of my head. But yeah, to try to be really sensitive to other cultures and the value of being able to bring those different perspectives to the table. And being sensitive to that. I mean, as Americans, I was born and raised in the States. Like, we really do think, we should dominate the world. And that's just kind of patently false. And so to be sensitive to that and be like, oh, sorry, I was in American mode. I was dominating everything, And people really appreciate when we have some sensitivity to the fact that we show up that way, and to the fact that we know that that's not true, and need to make space for a new way of being together. So I hope that kind of addresses what you're talking about.
And between Buddhist sanghas, like it sounds like the founder has a Theravada background as well as Zen.
Oh, okay. Between Buddhist sanghas, thank you. Yeah. Well, we're in a good position. We have this Theravadan background, we have this Vajrayana background, and then a lot of us met in Japan, which is all Mahayana, right? So we can speak from those different perspectives and are familiar with those. For people not familiar with it, those are the three main branches of Buddhism: Theravadan, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And so we're comfortable in all three, or some of us are comfortable in all three, and really open to the benefits and drawbacks of each of those.
And then lastly, sorry, how about
Don't apologize.
species? So in Buddhism's overflowing with human and more than human beings, right? How have you all been navigating that? Because a lot of sanghas handle it quite differently.
Oh, interesting question. Interspecies. Well, this part of the world, sorry, okay, I don't need to apologize for this. I'm an ecology geek. I just love, and so we're blessed with a lot of wildlife. We're blessed with an abundant natural environment. And that's been a real source of love and joy for us. And we've been pretty actively engaged in habitat restoration and sharing this center with a lot of different kinds of beings. And then depending on the person, some of us have more background with, for example, different kinds of shamanism. Spent a lot of time in Japan with Shinto, which is nature-based. It's basically a form of shamanism. So a lot about unseen spirits and so on, which is also very present in Buddhism. It's a little bit in the background, maybe not super obvious for people who aren't too in depth. But yeah, we don't have a lot of like spirit rituals at this point in time, and part of that has just been being busy making sure our center survives, right? Which, as you know, hitting the 20-year mark is an accomplishment. And so yeah, I look forward to, now that we're stable and yeah, being able to explore these, yeah, nature, gosh, nature rituals, the elements. Yeah, it's an exciting frontier. Okay, everybody, thanks for staying on for so long. Really nice to see you. Please feel free to be in touch. We're really open to meeting one another, discussing different things, learning from one another, and really happy to have this time with you all and be here at Limicon together. Looking forward to more. And so we like to close everything. Feel free to join us or not, depending on your comfort level, by dedicating all the good things that have happened here to the welfare of all beings. Thanks for coming. Wishing you a very beautiful day, a very fruitful Limicon.
Matt is asking about the best way to reach out to you to foster future connection.
Oh, what's the best way? Do we have email on the website?
Yeah, and I can just drop that into the chat.
Yeah,
as well.
please, just drop it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, get in touch and remind us that we met here, and yeah, let's continue that conversation and the explorations together. Okay. Wishing you a wonderful day.